Ladies, gentlemen, and barbarians of all ages, with Vessel of Hated out in just a few days, and us being able to play the review build early thanks to Blizzard giving us the opportunity to play as such, I figured for the sake of anyone actually considering Barbarian this season, it's probably a good moment to talk leveling and specifically my recommended build for doing so in Vessel of Hatred. A lot of things are different this season compared to most prior. Firstly is that your leveling build will get a lot more mileage now, as max level is now 60 before Paragon points become a proper thing. A main one, especially for Season 6, is that most people will do the majority of their leveling journey in the expansion campaign itself. The lowest that I've heard of somebody coming out of the campaign doing it full the way through was right around level 50, and that's because the quest line just gives such good quest completion XP, and those actual rewards are fixed XP, and they chose to make Vessel of Hatred quests quite valuable in that regard. Because quest XP doesn't scale with your difficulty tier, generally speaking this results in the simple truth that most people will just play through the game's actual expansion campaign on normal difficulty tier until they reach the end of the campaign, and so the leveling builds will have that as a consideration too. One final thing that I do want to bring up quickly as well is that certain things after the stat squish that they did are especially strong at lower levels. Damage over time effects seem a lot better than flat damage is for the first few levels at the very least, just because of the calculations that you get with super low damage numbers, and the Iron Barb's Elixir is MVP. Iron Barb's Elixir is 150 thorns, and you can start using it as early as level 10 if you can find the materials to craft it. 150 thorns is enough to destroy a lot of content whenever anything touches you, up until like level 40 honestly, and maybe even up to 50 if your setup allows, which Barbarian can lean into. So if you find yourself with the materials to get those elixirs, you should probably make them and use that, but we won't be focusing our build around that properly, just mentioning that you should consider it and that it is a good option to have. That said, we are focusing on the first part of that, which is just the way that early leveling damage over time effects seem to scale quite well. And so this is going to be a bleed-based leveling build for the first time that I've recommended this since essentially base game launched last year. That said, the main concept is pretty simple. Flay and Rend as your main damage dealers, shout skills to support, Call of the Ancients for a solid bit of burst damage, and then it plays very simply and solidly as a result of all that. That said, let's talk about the full list of skill points that we choose and the order that we take them in, the weapon expertise choice that we take, the legendaries to keep an eye out for, or even the ones that you can purposefully seek out very early on, and then how to push into Torment 1 with the right additions when you hit 60. Then we'll go over your tempering affixes as well, and also your first 25 Paragon points that you'll get right when you hit level 60 as well, just to sort of round it all off. First things first, then we have your basic skill for the build, which, as already mentioned, is going to be Flay. We also take Enhanced Flay for the chance to apply Vulnerable on hit as well. After that, we pick up Rend as a core skill, as well as Enhanced Rend to make it extend vulnerable duration on affected enemies that are hit. Then early on, I recommend Furious Rend for the resource refund that gives you, but once you have your resource management legendary and a bit more reliable vulnerable application, it's worth swapping for the 30% increased damage to vulnerable enemies option instead. Then we pick up Battle Flay for the increased bleeding damage after hits with Flay, though again worth mentioning, once you are ready to move on to harder combat, which will generally happen after you finish the campaign, it's worth considering the swap to Combat Flay instead for the stacking damage reduction that gives you. Moving on from that, then we pick up Rallying Cry for our first shout skill. This gives us a ton of resource generation and also movement speed while active. We take its enhancement, which makes the skill give us Unstoppable as well as a buff, and then we pick up the Tactical Rallying Cry enhancement as well for even further resource generation. When the shout is active, resource simply is not an issue. Then we take Challenging Shout as our second shout skill for the build, taunting nearby enemies and giving us hefty general damage reduction while it is active. Then we pick up its enhancement for bonus maximum life while the shout is active too, as well as Tactical Challenging Shout for fury generated every time that you take damage with the shout running. Then from here we go straight to our last shout, Warcry, which gives us a damage increase while active as well as any friendlies nearby as well. We also take Enhanced Warcry, which gives berserking after activating the shout, and then Power Warcry for an even further damage boost if there is a larger group of enemies close as well. After that, we round back and put the remaining 4 ranks into Rend, our core skill, to just max out its damage as it is our main source of actual damage application. Then we move to the Weapon Mastery tree and grab 3 ranks of Hamstring for a 45% chance to apply slow to bleeding enemies whenever However, they take damage from the dot itself. Next step, we put 1 rank into Pit Fighter as a passive as well for bonus damage against close enemies and reduced damage from distant enemies to us. We also have this unlock the ultimate skill cluster at this point, and from here we pick up Call of the Ancients as well as its 2 enhancements. In total, this summons some friends to help out in combat, doing a bunch of damage with their own abilities and a bunch of bonus effects too. While this is active, we have 20% bonus attack speed and 25% bonus damage, both of which are fantastic increases, and they each provide extra effects as well when the different ancients hit with their attacks. After that, we put the remaining 2 ranks into Pit Fighter to get the rest of that bonus damage and damage reduction. Then we go to put 3 ranks into Swiftness as a passive for a pure movement speed increase, just permanently active. We then take 2 ranks of the Booming Voice passive for increased shout duration, and this unlocks the key passives to choose between. There is some actual logic to using Walking Arsenal here, because it will be a pretty permanent 16% bonus damage if you do this, because you can purposefully set Flay and Rend to use different weapons, but Unconstrained is generally better for giving you massive burst windows with Call of the Ancients and Warcry, as well as giving you permanent berserking when you are lower than, 2/3 of your health. Worth mentioning here though, whenever you manage to have an Iron Barb's Elixir active, as I mentioned earlier, you want to use Barbed Carapace as your key passive instead to scale your Thorns damage and apply it automatically around you in close range, but otherwise you usually want to stick with Unconstrained. After that, we pick up the remaining rank of Booming Voice, then we take all 3 ranks of Raid Leader for healing per second while a shout skill is active, and all 3 ranks of Guttural Yell for damage reduction while shouts are active too. We then take 1 rank of Aggressive Resistance for some damage reduction while berserking, but mostly just to let us take all 3 ranks of Prolific Fury for increased resource generation while you are berserking. After that, we take the other 2 ranks in Aggressive Resistance for the damage reduction too, then we take all 3 ranks of Slaying Strike for bonus damage to injured enemies, 3 ranks of Cut to the Bone for increased bleeding damage to vulnerable enemies, and then we take 3 ranks of Pressure Point to give us lucky hit chance to apply vulnerable with Rend, just as a secondary way of applying the debuff. We grab 3 ranks of Imposing Presence for the 15% increase to maximum life, and 3 ranks of Martial Vigor for the damage reduction from elites as well. Next up, full ranks of the Belligerence passive for bonus damage after hitting an enemy with a basic skill, because we do that constantly. Then we take 1 rank in Thick Skin for Fortified Generation when hit, and on the live servers with Nahantu Renowned skill points included as well, you will have 5 more skill points to spend than I have done so far, which you would want to put into 3 ranks of Counter Offensive for increased damage when you have more than half of your health fortified, and then Endless Fury to make Flay generate just a touch more resource when used. That finishes off the skill tree then, so let's talk about your weapon expertise. Generally speaking, the best weapon type for this type of build is two-handed axes, due to them having a damage over time increasing inherent affix, and with that you want two-handed sword expertise on top of it to turn a percentage of your damage into even further bleed buildup, quite as simple as that. Then following that, let's just talk about the legendaries that you want to run while leveling, and beyond that. The Expectant aspect is incredible early on, and you can get this from a dungeon guaranteed and equip it very early in your journey, giving you a stacking buff for your next core skill each time that you use a basic skill. Aside from that, the aspect of Vocalized Empowerment is unlocked for the Codex from the Sirocco Caverns dungeon, and this gives you fury generated per second while your shout skills are active, which is incredibly important to managing our resource levels long term. The other main one that I recommend that you can get for the Codex from a dungeon is the aspect of the Umbral, which gives resource when you crowd control a target, and due to passives and a bleed-based playstyle, we are constantly applying slow, if nothing else. That said, leveling this time around includes all the way up to level 60 and even a little bit beyond that, so some things will significantly increase your power if you happen to find them as RNG drops to apply to slots either as you go, or even just when you hit 60 itself and you're preparing for your journey into your pit tier 20 to unlock Torment 1. The first one is the Creeping Death aspect. This is just a nice big chunky multiplier to damage over time for each crowd control effect on an enemy, also applying to staggered bosses and unstoppable enemies in a slightly different way, but still super strong for it. Edgemaster is also reasonably good if you just want more damage increases, as it combos well with the Expectant, but the actual numbers that you can find it on in the Codex entry from a dungeon is just not really worth using, so it's much better if you actually find it in the wild. As well, there is the aspect of Anger Management, which can keep you berserking quite a lot and is definitely worth considering if you find it, and for more defensive or quality of life choices, the Might aspect is just free 20% damage reduction in a build that frequently uses basic skills like we do. Wild Bolt is great for a frequent pull and damage increase, especially as the aspect scales the pull frequency with Codex level rather than damage boost, which means it is particularly stronger early on when you have a low level Codex aspects for the other options. Other than that, Accursed Touch is just great for another tool to apply vulnerable and have it be more consistent. For your tempers, generally for leveling, I would stick to only weapon tempers, and the best one for this is, unsurprisingly, chance for Rend to to hit twice, so hunt for that as much as you are willing to put any resources into it on your weapons. Then if you're feeling overly rich with resources, the second priority is close enemy damage in the offensive section. For runes, you likely won't have much choice for this while leveling, but an easy one to get is Tun, which is the one that spawns stun grenades from Rogue. The main reason for this is mostly just to get frequent triggers of the Umbral aspect that we use, as well as get decent stagger buildup for bosses as well. Then finally, for getting properly set up, let's talk about the first 25 Paragon points that you will spend. This is what most players will have upon hitting level 60. It's the first point, the points from base game, region, renown, and then the Altars of Lilith as well. You can get a few more at this stage if you have already done the Nahantu renown levels, but most players won't be at that point before hitting level 60, so I'm not going to be counting those here. Anyways, the path here is pretty simple for your first 25. At the very start, you want to head up the right side through the additive damage rare node, as that amount of bonus damage is actually a relatively large amount with the stats that you will have at this point in the game. Then we head up through the strength nodes and over to the glyph socket, and here we have the one guaranteed glyph that you will have unlocked when you hit level 60, no matter what you're doing, because this just starts unlocked. For Barbarian, it is Challenger. This is the glyph that increases the effect of normal nodes within the radius, and the secondary effect increases damage to elites. This is actually quite good because if you stack a bunch of strength in here early, it's just a really nice boost. With the rest of our points then, we grab the rare and magic nodes that boost damage and damage to elites right beside this. Then we just make sure we have enough strength to trigger the bonus effect of this glyph, which is bonus damage to elites. And for the interim, you can just stick that last point in something like the bonus maximum health node over here for the nice boost of a rare node that gives you. With all that covered, then let's talk about just how to play the build itself. And it's honestly quite simple, as you may expect from the skills that we are using. Flay you really want to just use to build up your actual resource itself, but you always want to hit with it once every few seconds at the very least to keep your buffs up. Otherwise, if you have resource enough to spend it, use rend to apply our main damage. Use the shouts that you have on cooldown, but try to overlap them as little as possible, try to spread them out so you can keep just general shout uptime high rather than using all of them in one burst. Of course, this may not always work. Sometimes you just gotta use challenging shout for survival. Sometimes you're completely out of resource and you just gotta press something so you're not just sort of standing around, but this is the ideal situation. Then Call of the Ancients is your big burst window when you press the button. The Ancients themselves do a fair bit of damage while the skill is active, and when they are active you gain attack speed and damage as well, so try to line these up with your shouts and decide from that. Pretty much just do your best to use them on larger packs of enemies, against large groups of elites, or against bosses, of course. That then just about does it for today then everyone, our Barbarian leveling build for Season 6, focused around the main activities that people will be doing to level this time around, and of course adjusted with the changes that we've had recently too. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and of course let me know down in the comments below how the build treats you come time to experience the expansion live. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweets.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world our stage. Goodbye.